In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the three accusatory voices that come our way when we go through losing seasons. So, if you live in and around the Lake Norman area and you're like us, you probably have a lot of competing voices in your life, and some can often come at us with accusations. It could be from your own negative self talk, or it could be coming at you from other people. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the three types of accusatory voices we often hear, and we're going to give you a framework that'll help you identify them for what they are and will help you overcome them. All right. Welcome to the Four Lake Norman podcast. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm joined by Anson Hamberry, our lead pastor, Tina Johnson, our communications director, and I'm Tucker Furr. I'm the community pastor at Lake Norman Baptist Church, which we're all a part of. And we're a church that exists to bring healing, connection, and purpose to people all around Lake Norman through the love of Jesus. And we started this podcast as an extension of that. So we hope by listening to this episode today, you experience a little bit of healing, a little bit of connection, a little bit of purpose based on our conversation. And today we're talking about, as you've already heard, the three accusatory voices that come our way when we go through losing seasons. And this flows out of the current sermon series that we're in called It's How You Play the Game, How God Builds Winning Traditions Through Losing Seasons. And we're diving into an Old Testament wisdom book called Job. And Job is the main character of that book. And so Anson, why don't you tee up for us what we're going to be covering from the story of Job today?
Yeah. So in our study, we see three voices that came Job's way, trying to explain these, unexplained losses, the losses of biblical proportion that Job endured. He lost all his possessions. He lost 10 children. He lost his health, had these this horrible, health affliction. Why did all this happen? And so he had these three friends, that really represent three different voices that come our way when we experience seasons of loss. And so I'll just name the three, and then we'll kind of unpack them a little bit and think about how they affect us. One voice that gets in our head when we're experiencing loss is that God is punishing us. Maybe I've done something wrong and God's punishing me for this. A second voice that gets in our head is, you deserve this. You're a lousy person, maybe you're worse than you think you are, and you deserve this. And then the third voice that gets in our head, that's sort of a version of the second, but a little bit more subtle, I think, and that is, maybe you're not as good as you thought you were. Maybe you've deceived yourself into thinking you're a better person than you really are. So losses come our way, sometimes late at night when we're feeling the pain of it. We can get in our own head, God's punishing me. He has to be. I really do deserve this because I'm a rotten person. Or maybe I'm not quite as good as I thought I was. And they come our way in all these different ways. And so for anybody that I don't know. Yeah, I feel like we can all relate to this. When something hurts, it's so easy to get inside our own head. And sometimes too, like the advice that people have for us, the attempts to be comforting from well-meaning friends
Sometimes makes it worse.
Sometimes makes it worse because they'll kind of fall into one of these lanes, and they'll try to be sympathetic, but kind of reinforce that. So I'm curious how that lands on you guys. Like, before we even kind of dive into some details, just on the surface level, well, what does that do inside of you? How do you resonate with those?
Well, I think, since we have the sports theme with the series, and you've tasked me to keep an eye out for some sports storylines. The different themes we're talking about. But, this concept of getting in your head when things don't go your way, when you're in a competition or you're, in athletics, like, that is a huge thing that happens and that athletes have to deal with. And the best ones are able to just flush a bad play, get back out there and play the next play. But there, there's a common phrase they use in sports called getting the yips, which is when if you get in your head, it's like
Yeah.
just it perpetuates you making bad plays. It happens to me playing pickleball. I don't know if you guys have started the pickleball craze, but if I have a couple bad hits or I just like can't get it in play and keep hitting it out or I keep hitting it in the net, like I definitely get in my head and then it just like it keeps happening. And so yeah, that's called the yip. There's a funny Ted Lasso episode in season 1 where one of the players gets or actually the whole team gets the yips. They go on a bad stretch and then they do like this ritual where they all bring like something meaningful in their life and they burn it in a barrel and it's like symbolizing like getting rid of those negative thoughts and then they turn things around. But it's a pretty entertaining episode if you ever want to take the time to go watch it. But I think all the time in sports, the constant battle is how quickly can you bounce back from mistakes that you're going to make, because you're going to make mistakes in sports. And so it's just the ability to not let those mistakes compound and get bigger and more worse by continuing to replay it in your head of, well, I should have thrown this pass better, or I should have been able to read that linebacker who was sneaking up, to cover the running back in the flat. I should have done this, that, and the other. It's like you can't think about that. You got to flush it and you got to go to the next play.
Yeah. And I feel like life and rewind is always clearer than when you're actually going as well. And like for me, I find myself anytime something happens, it's like a tagline for life to say, what did I do to deserve this? Or what did I do so wrong? Or what is God trying to tell me through this situation? But I also think in the story of Job, it kind of makes me look at it as not just the voices that I'm hearing from, around me, but it's, as a friend, am I saying something? Or am I encouraging in a wrong way or in a misguided way that maybe is, slowing down someone else's process of healing and, seeking those types of healing in seasons of in the low seasons. So yeah, and I think we naturally want answers to why something's happened to us. It could be something as simple as, why did I spill this coffee on the way out of the door this morning? Or it could be something that's really like a tragic loss or experience that you're going through, and you just want an answer. And the question is why? And to your series last week, the who, not why, I think a lot of those voices get in our head when we take our focus off of the one who controls our future and we try to find the answers somewhere else.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And it speaks to our context, we're Christians, trying to live out the Bible, we, in the context of, church relationships, as well as, just friendships, family, workplace, all those things. And we're trying to live out, a belief in a God who is good, right? But reconciling that with a world where lots of bad things happen. And I think your point about sometimes we try to be encouraging and it sometimes doesn't go the way that we intended. I think that's probably a helpful way to actually get into that first voice, God is punishing me. We tend to be our own harshest critic, right? So we would, I would venture to say that most of the time, a well-meaning person isn't going to go to their friend and say, God is punishing you. Probably not going to happen. And when we read the Old Testament story of Job, that's not entirely how it happened either. He had this friend that came his way, and sort of in a subtle way, the message was, God is punishing you. But what he said was, Job, as I think about, my experience in life, the people who do things the right way are the ones that God blesses. And I know you've done things, the right way in your life, and you've had a lot of blessings. It's the ones that, that go astray. Those are the ones that God punishes. And so he's kind of like drawing this conclusion in sort of a backhanded way. But the message is clear. He's clearly implying that, God's punishing Job, which, when you read the story, that's not at all what's happening. So like we as the reader, we actually see some of the behind the scenes, but Job didn't see that. Job's friends didn't see that. And as they're just reacting to life, which is how we do in our own lives, they're kind of drawing these conclusions. And to make it worse, Job's first friend, after kind of implying that God was punishing Job, tries to kind of soften it. He tries to be sympathetic in a way that, unfortunately, I think a lot of us Christians tend to do, and will say something like, I mean, it's actually a blessing when we suffer, because that's how, we learn to get close to God, and that's how we experience God's comfort. So, hey, don't feel bad that, God's punishing you. It's actually a blessing. We should thank God for that. Which is this weird mix of, okay, yeah, there's truth in that, that God, he does bring hard things. We've seen that, and he has a good purpose in them. Yep, that's true. Yeah. But when somebody's experiencing pain, that is not the time, to come along and be like, hey, what a blessing.
Yeah. Well, and that, and that's the thing that I think is so hard, but also so relatable, is that it was coming from a place of, hey, this is my friend.
Yeah.
And we want people that we love and care about not to suffer.
Right.
And we want to rush that process because we want them to be better on the other side of it. So I think it comes from such a well-meaning place. And even in the story, it's like the most compassionate thing that they did was at the beginning when they just sat with them. And were just a presence there for Job. It was when they started to try to fix him and make it better and try to expedite a process that they didn't understand, that it became something that was not a positive.
100%. Yeah. The dangers of trying to fix our friends.
Yeah.
Yes. On our timeline.
On our timeline. Yeah.
And I think we see things in such a justice, in such a black and white worldview of things. Like, it does stand to reason in our minds that good things should happen to good people and bad things should be reserved for the people that are inherently bad, right? That was their view. And so they look for the reasons, like, okay, well, what did you do wrong that could be potentially be causing this pain and suffering? But we don't see God's view of things, which is a much larger, expansive view of the big picture. And so it's hard in the moments to look back to that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, to this question of, is this God's punishment or not? Very often that's what we feel. In the story of Job, that wasn't at all the case. And there's a lot more that we could say about that. Ultimately, Job learned that no, it wasn't God's punishment at all. And I think that's more often than not the case with us. Like, we're assuming some things that ultimately just aren't true. It's not true that God is like looking around every corner to try to, whap us for, stepping out of line. That's just not the way that God operates. And so more often than not, I would say that's a lie. That's an accusation that just isn't true, that God is punishing us when we're going through seasons of loss. Second voice that comes along is this, you deserve this voice. And again, that's not one that our friends would usually say out loud, not usually one that we would say out loud. But I know for me, I can get really hard on myself, blaming myself for whatever the losses are that happen. And, I can think, even just silly examples of, when I was young, just doing athletics and sports, and I would, do something wrong. I remember one time I was on a ski trip and, just trying to, ski well and apply what I learned and all the things, and just kept, falling and couldn't get it right. And I remember just very vividly, as a teenager, like all by myself, standing on the side of the ski slope, just like, you idiot, you got no business being here. What are you even trying to ski for? Just and I just played it. I could, probably name a lot of other experiences as well. Just very easy to like turn inward and be like, you idiot, like you deserve anything that comes your way. And I think that happens to us. Sometimes that voice of accusation gets in our head. And Job had a friend that, was pretty blunt like that. He came along and he was like, hey, your 10 kids were killed. Well, they got exactly what they deserve. And now you're experiencing loss, getting what you deserve as well. Not all that helpful. And again, in the story, that wasn't at all what was happening with Job. And Job didn't see himself that way, but this friend who absolutely represents this accusing voice in our life, that was the clear message of just like, hey, if anybody's to blame, it's you, because you deserve,
What if he stayed friends with that guy?
That's a good question. With any of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I haven't experienced that type of accusation from someone else, but I vividly remember when I was younger, when Tennessee would lose just frustrating games.
Yeah.
And I knew that I had done something wrong in God's eyes. Like, not too long before the loss happened, I would be like, God's punishing me. He's putting me through this just heartbreaking loss because of what I did, a couple days ago. And I think we're so prone to that. As silly as that is, that was where my brain would get.
All of Tennessee Nation is being punished.
Right. Because of what I did.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it just, that's a silly example, but I think there's way more serious ways that we do that to ourselves. And even if it is involving way more people, we still think we're the linchpin, and what we did is ultimately bringing that result on.
I actually think that's a great thing to bring out, because it highlights how quickly we make things about us.
Yeah.
And how ridiculous it is to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, I grew up a Gator fan, used to just bleed orange and blue.
Unfortunately.
Well, it's not been much to cheer for. But yeah, it's very same kind of thing. And I'd be like, oh, last game I sat over there when we won, and I sat in this. I sat in the wrong seat.
Didn't wear the right shirt.
Yeah, what an idiot!
Had backwards last time.
Yeah. But just this self-blame, self-judgment voice. Oh man, it's a killer.
Yeah.
It's a very self-centered way of thinking.
Yeah.
But you don't think of, when you hear the word self-centered.
Yeah.
You don't think about it in the midst of a season of loss.
Yeah.
But it really is that.
Yeah.
Because it's like, this must be about me.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, it may not be about you at all.
Yeah.
Sometimes your season of loss could potentially be something God's doing in someone else's life.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to use your situation, just like he's using Job's years. And how many years later? We don't even know, right?
Yeah.
So many years later,
Mm-hmm.
and how many people have been impacted by his story.
Yeah. What's the third
version? Yeah. Appreciate you moving us forward. Yeah. You're not as good as you thought you were, which is still about me. Right.
Right.
But instead of being like sort of this voice of despair, like you're no good at all, it's, you're trying to be good. You thought you were good. And the way out of it is to kind of almost like bargain with God. So this third friend that Job has, he's kind of the logical one. He's kind of putting the pieces together, and he's like, hey, what would we expect? Who can operate at God's level? When we really just, let's think logically about this. We're not ever gonna compete with God. We can't function on his level, but what we can do is, hey, get our act together, bargain with God. If we can get things right, then, hey, we can put this whole mess behind us. So yeah, you weren't as good as you thought. You aren't as good as you think, but you can kind of tweak some things a little bit, make a deal with God, and forget about this whole mess. It's kind of the gist of this third.
It's like an equation.
This third voice. Yeah. It's like, let's break this thing down and see if we can't figure it out and fix what was wrong and go forward. It's kind of this third voice that comes our way. And I think that's true for a lot of us too, especially the analytical minds among us. If those of us who are deep feelers might fall prone to that second voice of just, oh, I deserve it, I'm terrible.
Yeah.
This third voice might be, something that we stumble on, those of us who,
Fixers.
Yeah, fixers and try to sort of break things down, right? Like, okay, what can I do to put this thing back together and climb my way out of this hole?
Yeah.
That's kind of where I think this third voice comes from.
Yeah. I personally have been guilty being that voice. I feel like in my own marriage, often I'm trying.
You're Haley's friend.
Yeah, right. When she comes to me with an issue, and I immediately go into like the logic and reason of like, okay, well, we need to do this. Yeah. And that's not what she needs in that moment. She just, She just wants me to listen and like acknowledge, especially if it involves me, acknowledge the wrong that I did instead of saying like, oh, okay, well, we just need to do this, this, and this moving forward. And, the whole, the whole like logic and reason. And there's a time and a place for that, but it's usually not in the heat of the moment when the emotions are at their highest. So yeah, I'll confess that I've been guilty of being that voice before.
I would never do that as
right, yeah, never.
Sounds like an age-old debate between husbands and wives. Of the guy being the fixer in a lot of cases and trying to fix the problem, and the wife did not ask you to fix anything. They asked you to hear them out and to listen.
So if anybody wants to dig a little deeper on these things, the sermon that I preached that kind of goes along with this kind of breaks these things apart a little bit more and dig a little bit more to the context of Job. But it's interesting how one of the things we see is sometimes you can perceive the accusation in the attempted solution. So kind of like you're trying to help, your wife, you're trying to help your husband, trying to help somebody fix their problem. But the way you're trying to help them fix it reveals what you believe the problem is.
Yeah.
And it's really an accusation sort of cloaked in a solution, which is exactly what Job's friends did. It's exactly what, what we do. And, but what do we do about that? It's a problem. And there are no easy fixes. And I think that's part of, you mentioned earlier, Job is a wisdom book. That's one of the themes that we're learning, as we go through this as a church. And wisdom requires discernment. In many cases, wisdom's not what's on the page. It's not the words that are written, but it requires the ability to kind of read between the lines of life and discern what's happening where it's not so clear. It's not so obvious, what's happening. That's where wisdom is required. So the book of Job in the Old Testament is a wisdom book. And so we should expect we're in some territory that's murky, like it's not super clear, especially because we're not perfect people. Like we do things that are wrong and sometimes even on purpose. And so sometimes if we're honest, we do deserve the things that come our way. Does that mean that's what God is doing? No, not necessarily, but we're trying to kind of piece these things out. So how do we find a way forward, through kind of the haze of all of these things?
Yeah. And I think, even before we get into how we overcome those voices, just how you identify them almost is the first step.
Yeah.
Because if you can identify them and name them, it removes some of the power of it. And I was listening to a sermon recently, and the pastor was saying, the way whether it's the voice of the accuser, which is in biblical terms, that would be Satan, this spiritual evil figure that's the force behind all the evil in the world. The way you recognize his voice is if it's leading you into a place of despair, of depression, of shame, of guilt. But the voice of Jesus is only ever going to lead us to life. So when there are things that we do that are wrong, now that's not, Job's case, but when we do mess up and we do things that are wrong in God's eyes, he will bring conviction, but the accuser's voice will bring conviction in order to make you feel shame and guilt that will keep you in a place of despair. Jesus brings conviction in order to lead us ultimately to life, to help us we're going on this path, and Jesus comes and says, hey, why don't you go to this path? It's actually going to be better for you. And that's how he brings conviction. And so I think that's a good way to discern, what voice is what. But what are some things we can do to overcome these voices once we identify and are able to name them?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. So one, we've already mentioned it a couple of times, and the whole last podcast was about it. Let's ask the right question to begin with. And the right question usually is who, not why. And I think, why just keeps everything focused on, I'm the one to blame. It also is the question of, well, I'm really the one who should be the judge of this. So if I had all the information, if I knew why this was happening, then I could be the judge of whether I think it's right or wrong. Either way, it puts ourselves at the center. So the more we can get ourselves out of that spot of either blaming ourselves for everything or thinking we're the one who can think the clearest about it. Ask who, not why, especially in these hard questions, trusting in a God who, the way that he acts is going to lead us to life. It's hope, not despair. So that's who God is. It's who we believe God is. And that can redirect kind of the way that we frame things. So that's one. The second one is to talk to God, So one of the things that Job did, and he's the only one in the book that did, is he actually took his questions to God. And you don't have to pray a certain way. Sometimes we were hesitant because we think, I'm not saying things the right way. And so we don't engage with God at all. And we're all in different places in our spiritual journey, but this is what prayer is. It's just simply talking to God. And sometimes it's saying, God, I'm kind of stuck. I don't know why this is happening. I feel like you're punishing me. I feel like maybe I deserve this or I don't deserve this. Yeah. I'm trying to be good, but it always seems like it's never good enough. Even just getting things out in the light by naming what you see is a way to talk to God. I think that's a beginning point. So ask who, not why, talk to God. And then I think motivations are huge, just to consider our own motivations and what was sort of the crux of the disconnect between Job and his friends was they all assumed his motivation was to get his stuff back. All of their advice centered around getting your prosperity back. And in fact, that's exactly what Satan in the story is accusing Job of as well. He's like, hey, Job only worships God because of the prosperity that he gets out of it. It's not that he truly worships God, not that he's truly righteous. It's that he's selfish and he wants all these good blessings. And so that's the question.
You're rather a fan, right?
Yeah, exactly. But for Job, the way that he was able to actually dismiss these voices and overcome them, which he did in the story, was he wasn't focused on the prosperity. He was actually focused on righteousness. He didn't want his stuff back. He wanted his name cleared. And so the whole focus of his conversation with God, his prayers with God were, God, I'm working to be righteous here. And as far as I can tell, I know I'm not perfect, but I don't deserve the kind of things that are coming my way. And so I'm struggling here. He's talking to God, but his motivations are coming from a right place. Like he wants to do what's right. And I think for us, that's a helpful thing to consider as well. Our motivations are always mixed, but the more we can kind of clarify, am I doing something objectively selfish here? And if so, all right, let me identify that and try to move a different direction toward doing the right things for the right ways with right motivations. And so I think beginning to shift the focus to, okay, what is at my core can help us discern even our own motivations in the ways that we struggle. So
yeah. Well, I think this was a great conversation. We hope it was beneficial to you and hope that you learned how to identify the accusatory voices in your life and overcome them. So if you enjoyed the episode, please like the video, subscribe to our channel so you get these episodes in the coming weeks. And we look forward to seeing you next week.